So how often have you heard someone say, this unit is footlocked, so they're bad, or some variant like that? We're often told that being mounted or not can be a big difference maker in how a unit plays in Fire Emblem, and today we're going to explore how big of a difference that is. I'm going to rank every Fire Emblem game based on how overpowered mounted units are in that game as a whole. There's a lot that goes into it, but the gist of it is, how much better is it in this game to be mounted than not to be mounted? So I made 5 tiers. The higher a game ends up, the more OP mounts are in that game. The top tier is for games where mounts are far above the rest, no contest. Mounts better is for games where mounts are still clearly better, but foot units can compete and maybe situationally even be better. The middle tier is for games where it seems mounts and foot units can exist in perfect harmony, or at least it's really close. And the lower 2 tiers are for games where foot units can actually outrank mounted units, with the bottom being for games where they're far better. And we'll see if any of those actually exist, or if this is going to be a very top-heavy tier list after all. Let's get into it. So FE1, we're going to go in chronological order. FE1, I'm going to put in mounts better. They just plain are. They don't have Canto or Rescue or anything like that, but more move is more gooder still in this game. There's not really much of a downside to being mounted. Some of the best units in this game are mounted. You know, Kain, Abel, Jagen, and Minerva are really good in this game, notably. But Marth is also really good, and so are, for example, Warpers, which, you know, they're not mounted. They're foot units. Generally, I'm going to not use exceptions as the norm, as it were. I'm not trying to generalize units based on like 1 or 2 examples. So if a game is like one really good mounted unit, I'm not just going to say mounts are better based off of that. And the same goes for Marth in FE1. He's known to be the best unit because you get the most bang for your buck if you invest in him. And since enemies always target him, he is the best investment target. But Kain and Abel and Jagen and Minerva are all still clearly really good. And there's like 4 of those where there's only 1 Marth and a couple warp users. So I don't think that, in the end, we can really argue that mount units are bad. That said, I don't think mounts are OP in this game, because they're not so much better than like Aguma and Navarre and Merrick and Wendell, all still really good. So I don't think it's fair to say that the mounts just like dominate this game. Probably off note here, before I forget, is that Cavaliers and Pegasus Knights in FE1 actually have both swords and lances, and also so does Draug. So that gives them a couple of extra options that they might not have in other games where they're forced to pick only one weapon type. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, they're not as dominant as in other titles, and the standards I employ will probably become more clear as I rank more games. FE2 Gaiden. I'm actually going to put this one in foot units better. Might be a bit of a shocker. So most mounts in this game are pretty mid at hell, like Matilda and Clive. They're fine. I would say they're probably better than Echoes, but I didn't really find them impressive last time I played Gaiden. And it's also, I think, not arguable that if you promote a villager to a cavalier, that actually really hurts them long term, because they tend to have worse stats and just kind of do poor combat overall. There's not many good lances for them to use in Act 1. And if you promote Atlas to a cavalier, you're also really screwing over, because Celica is just full of deserts and swamps everywhere. So you really just don't want to be a cavalier in this game. There's also not much of a point in moving around very fast in an all route map game. Literally every map in this game besides the last one is a route map. And like, moving further is great if you can just kill every enemy, but generally if you're a cavalier, you're not going to be able to do that reliably. So sacrificing combat for a horse in this game is a pretty bad trade overall, and that's one of the reasons why I felt like putting foot units in better, or why I put this game in foot better. That said, I do want to acknowledge that the Pegasus Knights in this game, specifically Ella, the Celica route ones, Katria and Pala, to a lesser extent Est, are all really good. They can ignore the terrain and fly over everything, and the effectiveness bonus that they get against enemy monsters is a really big difference maker. Even the triangle attack is kind of good in Gaiden. You can use it on enemy phase if you position correctly. So there are exceptions, but there's also a lot of examples of good foot units. You got units promoting Dread Fighters, not just the innate ones, but also the villagers. The clerics are really good, like Silk and Jenny. Alm is pretty good in Gaiden. Celica's pretty alright. The other mages are fine, armors are fine. So I think overall, I lean towards the foot units just being better. There's not that many good like counterexamples in this game besides the Pegasus Knights. And also Claire is just not that good in Gaiden. She's the only Pegasus Knight that Alm has. So yeah, foot better. We'll see if this trend continues, because right now it's 1-1. Next up, we have FE3, and I'm going to put FE3 straight in the middle. It's balanced. It's 2 books. I'm trying to just rank them as one game, book 1 and book 2. They're kind of different, but I do think they have a lot of overlap in their mechanics. So FE3 features dismounting for the first time in the series, and that makes a big difference in how mounted units and unmounted units compete. The way it works in FE3 is if a map is considered indoors, like you're in a castle, or you're some kind of palace or some other building, then all mounted units are forced to be in some kind of generic knight class, which is, I think from the top of my head, a 5-move sword-using unit. It might be 6-move, but it's less than units that are always dismounted, like mercenaries, like Ogma, Navarre, Merrick, and other mages, I think, are still 5-move. Sages, I think, have 6. But the point is, they now have a significant advantage over units that would be mounted but are barred from using them indoors. It's arguable that using swords and lances, it can actually be better to use swords in some maps than lances. You do retain more of your attack speed when using a sword because they're lighter than lances. But you also lose the option to, for example, use javelins, which can be kind of nice to use sometimes. Javelins are not great in this game because they weigh you down by so much you can't even double with them, from what I remember. But also, Book 2 especially in FE3 just has a lot of terrain that hurts mounted units. If you try to use like Cecil or Luke or even Aran in this game, you'll find that they often just get barred from parts of the map, or have to move really slowly in like a bunch of forests or mountains or cliffs or stuff like that. There's just a lot of that, and that feels like it's almost every outdoor map where that is the case, and then when they go indoor, they're just kind of reduced to not being mounted units anymore. So I actually think that in some cases in Book 2, you'd actually argue that foot units are better. But I do think there's a lot of maps in Book 1 especially where being mounted is still better. And also Draco Knights are just still insanely OP, and you do get like 4 of those in Book 2. Sida's pretty good, but especially Katria and Pala are just so strong in Book 2. I think Book 1 Sida's alright. I don't remember her being as outstanding as like Shadow Dragon, but still fine. But just Draco Knights still have disgustingly good strength and defense and good enough speed to double everything. They do have that fun thing where they lose res when they promote from Pegasus Knight to Draco Knight, but they still just murder everything. Like FE3 Book 2 Pala is just completely unfair. I did say I wouldn't emphasize exceptions, but across FE3 there's just a lot of good Draco Knights. Minerva's also pretty good. So that I think makes it so that it's still fairly balanced overall. There's not that many indoor maps overall, but like I said, a lot of the Book 2 outdoor maps still punish being mounted. So I thought putting it right in the middle was fair for it. FE4, Genealogy of the Holy War. To no one's surprise, this one is going into Mounts OP. This is one that I'm 100% confident is not going to have anyone in the comments that argues against it. Actually, I'm not that confident because there are people that argue otherwise, but they're wrong. Like, mounts benefit from roads so much more than foot units, so the gap between a unit with 9 move and a unit with 6 move is actually more like, instead of 3, it's more like 4 or 5 tiles depending on how much road you travel over. Maybe even like 6 tiles depending on the exact calculations. I forgot the exact math, but it's just such a big gap. And in a map like Chapter 2, where all you're doing for the first couple of turns is moving across empty space with no enemies in the way, that means that mounts build up such a huge lead in being able to contribute, and by the time that foot units make it to combat, it can be over or almost over. And if it's not over, it's because the mounted units are moving on to the next objective doing stuff there while they're leaving traps for the unmounted units. And it's not always as bad as it is at the start of Chapter 2, but it's a really good example of when it is really bad. And this kind of stuff happens just all over the place. I've seen some people argue like, you know, foot units are kind of underrated because you still need some units with really good combat. Mounts can't do everything. But the answer is that in FE4 mounts can often do everything. The best unit in the game for both generations, Sigurd and Seliph, are mounted for most of it anyway, in case of Seliph. And they can do almost everything, especially in Generation 2, when you can make mounted units as OP as you want, because you can give them any rings, any skills, and any high kill weapons that you want. And you should probably give those to the units that have the most mobility, because if combat is roughly equal, or, you know, if you can make their combat really, really strong, either way, then you want to just put these resources on the thing that has the most mobility, right? That's just common sense. I made a whole video about the gaps between mounted and unmounted units before, like a whole video essay kind of video. And My conclusion there was like, I think everyone would agree that if your combat is roughly equal, then having more mobility is a good tiebreaker at the very least. And in FE4, it's not just a tiebreaker, it just dominates. And also the foot units in that game aren't that spectacularly better at combat anyway before you get all those resources. Like Ira and Jamke and Holden, they're all fine, but they still got issues. And sure, the unit behind Sigurd is probably not as good as Sigurd, but you still got like Finn and Quan and Lex. If you give Lex the hero axe, that's still basically almost perfect combat. Finn with the Brave Lance or Quan with the Brave Lance can be basically perfect combat for a pretty long time. At some point, Lachesis promotes. That's like the best promotion ever, partially because she gives the mount. She also gets Pursuit and she also gets a bunch of weapon ranks, but she also just gets the mount. You can make like moves and choices to mitigate the drawbacks of being on mount in FE4. Like you can give a unit the leg ring and the night ring, but basically what you're doing there is you're making them a mounted unit. So that's not a great argument in favor of a mounted unit, I think. Also, mounts get to re-equip their weapon during Kanto, on top of being able to move after attacking, which is already so good. I don't even think I emphasize enough how good Kanto is. Just being able to attack something and then reposition to a slightly safer spot, or onto terrain, or in and out of range of supports maybe, like a Sigurd leadership or a Self leadership. Being able to put yourself in a spot where you can get danced by your dancer. All that's good. So one thing that goes against mounts in FE4 is that flyers are really freaking bad because they can't take advantage of roads, and also it's just not enough for them to do to make the flying different. Like flying over terrain often doesn't accomplish anything besides maybe saving some villages earlier. But generally it doesn't do anything. So like units like Fee and Aranus and Altena don't really have a whole lot of role in FE4. They're still fun to use for some purposes, but generally the foot units are actually better than the flyers, which is very rare in Fire Emblem. But I don't think, again, those I think are more exceptions than norm. Generally just having a unit be mounted is just such a huge buff in FE4. So no surprise that this is going to be this ranking. But if you disagree, please let me know in the comments. I'm pretty curious to read these. I'm going to disagree with you. I'm just going to warn you in advance. FE5, Thracia 776. This one is going into Balanced. So another game that has dismounting, just like FE3. But I do think this is a more interesting variant because when you go indoors, you are forced to use swords oftentimes, but the bow knights get to keep their bows, which is one interesting change. And there are some units that have innate sword rank, like Finn, for example, can only use lances when he's outdoors, but when he's indoors or when he dismounts, he can use swords, but he has like 30 sword experience or something. So he's not quite as bad off as someone would be if they were forced like E rank iron swords. Someone like Brighton or Hicks or any of the other lance knights in the game. They get massively nerfed by going indoors. But outdoors they're really good. Like outdoors, the mounts are still generally pretty dominant. They're still super Kanto. They don't get to re-equip after attacking like in FE4, which is so dumb, but they still get to do a lot of the things that make them really good outdoors. Rescue dropping is in this game. It's the first game where it exists, and it's really nice because it lets your foot units keep up a little bit better. I don't think it's enough to make foot units better that they can get rescue dropped, but it's a really nice feature that that's available to make a unit like, I don't know, Ocean or Leaf or someone else. Like you can move them forward if you want to. Yeah, I really like the balance of this game, and particularly the Manster arc is mostly indoors, and then the end game sequence is mostly indoors, almost all indoors in fact. So there seems to be a lot of spots where units that are just mounted can shine, like the section after Manster is very good for mounted units, but those sections I just named are really good for indoor units like Sages and Swordmasters and Leaf. So you have spots in the game where both types of units can be useful, and because of the fatigue mechanic and to a lesser extent like Paragon mode or the Paragon Scroll, or just generally units having better stats than the enemies, you can get away with using like a lot of different units. You're even encouraged to, and so just you don't need to load your whole team with mounted units or unmounted units, or even balance that team. You can just swap units in and out, and you don't really take much of a penalty. You also just have a lot of good pre-promotes in this game. So I think mounts and non-mounted units like foot soldiers are probably best balanced in FE5 so far. Maybe even in the whole series. I mean, I did say I like this game before. We're going to rank the GBA games all at once because they all have basically the same mechanics and they're all basically the same in this regard, and I'm going to put them all in mounts better. FE6, FE7, and FE8. So they're not OP. We have no more super canto. You can move again after doing like rescuing or trading or like using an item, but you can't do it after you're attacking. There's still rescue dropping though, which is huge. You can still move other units forward if you want to. You can even pick up other mounted units, which you cannot do in FE5 because they're basically hard-coded to be heavier than foot units. But you can rescue drop another horse if you want to. It's really funny. So there's a lot of dominant mounted units in GBA, flyers and non-flyers. And generally, if a unit is a foot unit, that tends to be seen as a drawback, and rightfully so. Because, first of all, FE8 and to a certain extent FE7 are just, for combat, pretty simple. FE6 normal mode is as well, but on hard mode, it is a little harder to be really good at combat. And like I said before, if the combat is easy to do, if units perform roughly equally, whether they're mounted or not, whether their stats are high or just kind of mid, then mobility tends to be one of the best stats because it makes a difference whether you can move further or not. But if it doesn't make a difference if you have like +5 strength or +5 speed, then, you know, you'd much rather have the extra mobility. It doesn't always apply. There's definitely spots in all these games where having higher stats makes a difference, but in a vacuum, if you have to choose between having +3 move or having +5 strength, oftentimes the +3 move is going to make a bigger difference because oftentimes you're killing the enemy either way. That's the most simple way I can explain this. That said, there's definitely some good foot units in these games as well. FE6 in particular, some of the best units are mounted units like the Christmas Cavaliers, Marcus, Milady, Percival. Those are often named examples. But, you know, Butker is a pretty good unit. Shanna, a mounted unit that a lot of people dislike using because she's got a pretty bad start, although she is pretty good, IMO. Similarly, Blazing Blade, it's got some okay mounted units, but Marcus is really, really strong in that game. And but FE7 also just doesn't have that many good units. Most of the good units are just pre promotes, like Hawkeye and who else? Pent, Harkin, things like that. But generally being a mounted is just better just for having all that utility. Like if you're going to deploy a unit that doesn't really do any combat, then being mounted is absolutely much better. You'd much rather have a rescue dropping flunky than you'd have a unit like Dorcas or someone like that around. FE8 in particular, I think just has a lot of units that get by from being mounted, and if they weren't mounted, they wouldn't be considered good at all. Units like Kyle, Ford, Franz, those units are like fine, except for Ford, he's awful. But because they're mounted, they kind of get by and get ranked above units like, I don't know, Lutz, Artur, Natasha, Mulder, people like that. Depends on who you ask, of course. Some people would rank the units I just named higher than the mounts, but that's why it's competitive at all. But generally, if you're killing everything like an FE8, then you might as well just be mounted, just because it goes faster that way. Okay, next up, I think it's going to be the most controversial ranking, which is Path of Radiance, a game that a lot of people have played because it came out on Switch 2 a while ago, probably like a year ago by now. I think most people would rank this in mounts OP. I'm going to rank it in mounts better, and I'm going to explain why. So the mounts are almost as good as they are in FE4, I think. They have Super Canto back again, but now we also have Rescue Dropping, and now we also have like Paladins that use multiple weapon types. Like they start with one weapon type and then they promote, and then you can just choose another weapon type, which will often be axes, because steel axes are E-rank, so you just have a more powerful option than any of the other weapons. Hand axes are E-rank, so you can just throw hand axes at people and kill them. By the way, Path of Radiance is really easy, so it's another one of those games where you'll probably just want to be mounted over being unmounted, just because you can move through a map faster that way when you're mowing down everything. Also, the Paladins are just kind of good, like Oscar and Kieran and Titania, of course, being a really, really powerful pre-promote. So mounts are pretty good. Also, the flyers are really good, Jill and Marcia. You have bonus experience to make units level up faster, so even if their combat was a much worse than the foot units, they still come out on top. Also, there's not that many good foot units to kind of combat them. Like, who's even good at fighting that's not a mount unit? It's like Boyd, Soren, I guess, but they do take investment too before they get good. That said, this game also buffs foot units in a way that we don't often talk about. Shove exists, which allows foot units to move one another. You can also shove mounted units if you have enough like constitution or weight or whatever to do it, or build. But generally it's easier to shove foot units with other foot units, and mounted units cannot shove, whereas foot units can. Rescue dropping is probably still better utility than shove, but it's a nice little midway compensation, I guess. So it gives them a bit of a niche. And also, you cannot pick up horses with other horses, but you can pick up foot units with rescue units, or with mounted units. So I think it makes units like Boyd and Soren better that you can pick up those units with mounted units and move them forward. And this game has so many good mounted units. Like you got Jill, you got Marsha, you got Tanith. Those are just the flyers. And then you got Oscar, Kieran, Astrid, Makalov, I guess, although he's mostly just good because he's mounted. He's not actually that good himself, but he's all right. He gets by. You still got the Night Ward, by the way, which makes mounted units even better because it just gives him 30% extra speed growth for free by just equipping an item that also gives defense and res. Like, that's just another added bonus. But I just named 7 mounted units. If you field 7 mounted units, they don't all need to attack on turn 1. They can often just pick up someone and drop them on the front line. So being a foot unit is hurt less in this game than, for example, I think FE6, FE7, or FE8, where your mounted units might be more busy and you might not have as many of them. You can still do rescue drops often in that game, but I think in a Path of Radiance particularly, I just find myself having a lot more action economy to rescue drop people, also because the game is, like, again, it's really easy to do it in. So those are nice. I guess also like a minor thing that sneakily buffs paladins in this game is in FE6 through 8 you only get like 1 Night Crest for a lot of the game. It's particularly bad in FE6, but it still applies to the other games, whereas the Path of Radiance anyone can just promote whenever as long as they reach level 21, or you just use one of the Master Seals, which are free across all the classes. Like, they're the same for everyone. So that's another like stealth buff that Cavaliers got in Path of Radiance. But yeah, I think it's nice that you can just rescue drop someone forward in that game, and you often get away with it. Also, Raisin being a 4-way Vigorer is pretty strong for mounted units because they have an easier time arranging themselves in the diamonds where they can attack again. But rescue dropping also makes that fairly easy. Like, if you want to drop someone in a Vigor arrangement, you'll need to canto 1 tile after doing it, and then you got like half your little Vigor diamond ready. So I think foot units can kind of compete in Path of Radiance. I do still think mounts are better. That's why it's not in the middle tier. That's why I got it up here. But I think they're comparatively not as dominant as they are in FE4. And I also am interested to see if other people would rank it here, because I do think a foot unit in Path of Radiance is much better than a foot unit in FE4. That's really the main way I want to look at it. Like, look me in the eye and tell me that Boyd and Soren and Ileana and I don't know, Stefan and Zyhark, tell me that they're as bad as like units in Genealogy. Also, the foot units are named from Genealogy, like Holland and Ira and Jamka. Those are the best ones. But you also have like much more mediocre units in foot units, like Tiltu, Claude, Bridget. What else exists in that game? A lot of the children that are not mounted. Like, you can go both ways here. But I think foot units are significantly better in Path of Radiance than they are in FE4. That's my main takeaway from this. If you want to remember anything, if you want to remember why I'm ranking mounts better for FE9, and that's the reason why. FE10, Radiant Dawn. I'm putting this one in balanced. Might be another surprise, although hopefully not as big as one as Path of Radiance. So Radiant Dawn, can tell, really deliberately nerfed mounted units in a lot of ways. You got the indoor penalty for mounted units. Units that are like Cavaliers, Wyvern Riders, etc. They get -2 move indoors. Just straight up big penalty just for being mounted. Just like, fuck you. Ledges, also a really big nerf to mounted units. Swamps, they're pretty present in this game. There's like 2 desert maps. There's a lot of maps with thickets. There's a lot more maps in Radiant Dawn where mounted units almost can't even participate. Like, if you look at like part 1, there's almost no mounted unit presence there. Like, Fiona's banned from 1-8 and is not around for half of it. You got like 3-4 with its ledges just kind of preventing Titania and Oscar from going to the top level of the map. There's just a lot more like sneaky mounted nerfs in that game. And also the foot units in that game are spectacular. You got Ike and you got Soth, for example. Those are honestly, I think, arguably better than Titania. Now, Har exists, and Har is one of the most ridiculous units ever made. He flies over everything. He is a massive tank. If he doesn't double, he's still like 2-shotting everything, but you can make him double, then he just sweeps up an entire map in just a blink of an eye. He is so good. But if you look right below Har on like a tier list and like looking for the next best mounted unit, who do you find? Titania, who's good, but significantly worse than Har, like a fair step below that. And then a lot of them below that are significantly worse than Titania again. Again, I just named Fiona as like the worst example, but also the Crimean Royal Knights, for example. They're all paladins, and they're all like mediocre to bad if you look at the game as a whole. Like, Joffrey is fine in the map he's in. Let me get rid of this right here. Like, Joffrey is fine in the maps he's in, but he's not a great unit or anything, and he just leaves for the rest of the game after 3-9, basically. Kieran barely exists, and he's like the best of the paladins in that group, and then you got like Makalov and Astrid, who are both pretty bad, so not a whole lot here. Also, I forgot to mention this for Path of Radiance, but the games also have Laguz, which I treat as kind of like an in-between of foot and mounted units. Their shapeshift is literally from going to like a 6-move unit to a 9-move unit. So, and they can like shove, but also have Canto in Radiant Dawn, if they're like birds. So they kind of have some mounted properties, but also have a lot of foot unit properties. I'm not sure what to call them, but I'd say Laguz are pretty underpowered in Path of Radiance overall, and they're kind of good in Radiant Dawn overall mechanically, if you can make them work. Like the Cat Laguz have some problems, but the Hawks are really good, the Wolves are pretty good. Laguz Royals are really powerful, and I don't really see them as either category. I guess the birds are more mounted than like the cats, but you know, you can still like see cats as a foot unit, right? If you wanted to. So I don't know how to treat those in this little ranking here, but generally I think they speak more in favor of balanced. There are maps in Radiant Dawn definitely where just being mounted is still really good. If you look at like the late part 3 maps for the Grow Mercenaries, and not the Pitfall Bridge map, but like everything else, like 310, 3-8, 3 Endgame. Those are just maps generally where I would say, yeah, for those maps, Titanias is much better than foot units if you can kill everything. Like if you're on lower difficulty, then those maps are really good for mounted units. But I don't know, most maps aren't really like that in Radiant Dawn. I think it generally is just balanced, and some maps, definitely foot units are just a lot better. So that's why I'm putting it in balanced. Shadow Dragon, we're back in Arcanea. So this one goes in mounts better because I think it's pretty similar to FE1 for the reasons why, and it's even more emphasized here. Most changes, I think, in this game favor mounts. You got the free reclassing now, so flyers can just turn into paladins and get rid of their bow weakness if they feel like it. Also their woke weakness, I guess. I don't know what I was going for there. So you can just make your flyer get rid of their biggest drawback to just be more dominant. Forges, I think, favor mounts because if they had a combat deficit, they can now make up for it. And specifically, mounts can use forged effective weapons to get rid of threatening enemy mounts. Also, a big argument for this compared to FE1, Marth sucks now, so there goes the best foot unit in the game, basically. I still think mounts in the Shadow Dragon are not as dominant in FE4, partially because they just don't have any of the funny tools that mounts often get, like Canto or Rescue. And I do think there are a fair number of use cases for foot units. You got stuff like Sniper and Swordmaster. They're accessible reclass options that have high weapon ranks, so sometimes a unit like Sita or Katria will want to go into those classes just to maybe fight some Manicheets or fight some flyers in a more easy way. This is more applicable to FE12 than FE11, but it can be done there. General it's got massive HP and defense, and it can just let you tank an entire map if you want to. It's more applicable to like slow/casual play, but I think it's still something that I should weigh here, especially because it's a good strategy in Shadow Dragon for trivializing maps. And also Heroes is not a bad class. It has almost as much move as a Cavalier, 8 versus 9, 8 versus 10 if you compare promoted classes. And Heroes can use hand axes as long as they got D-rank axes. So you're almost like a Paladin from a GBA if you go into Hero. I also want to give a special shout out to Setgar and Wolf, 2 of the funniest and best units for casual play, due to their massive growth rates, just being able to just turn into a general and just tank everything. They are best in non-mounted classes like Hero and like General, and sometimes they want to do other stuff, but generally it's those 2 classes that I see recommended to use the most. They don't really work that well as Bow Knights. I still think foot units have a place in Shadow Dragons, basically what I'm saying. There's some good foot units, there's also some really good flyers, like again, Draco Knight's still like really good. But I do want to emphasize that I think foot units have a place there in that game, but I don't think it's balanced. I think it's still like balanced in favor of mounts. FE12, same mechanics, but the class balance is better, but I still think I'm going to give it mounts better for this one. Because the mounted classes in this game are just so insanely good. Obviously, Paladin and Draco Knight just kind of run over this game as usual. The harder difficulties, they can't just like run in there and sweep everything, but they can do a pretty good job, and oftentimes they're still the best choice for your good combat units with high stats. Like sometimes they might go like General or something, but you want it to be in Paladin and Draco Knight if you can get away with it. Also, Horseman is better in this game than Shadow Dragon. You often need the higher speed cap to double later in the game, and with free reclassing it is more accessible than it was before. With free reclassing, what I mean is not just the DS mechanic of being able to reclass, but also FE12's ability to let you just reclass it within a male tree. Going like the merge class sets between male A and male B. So a unit that starts in like Hunter or Pirate can now go into like the Cavaliers and the Draco Knight and stuff like that. That's what I mean by that. So that I think that helps mounts as well. But again, if you're in higher difficulty, sometimes you need to go into General to tank a bunch of hits. I've seen General Pala being recommended for like a Chapter 4 strategy where you put her on a bridge in front of like Ogma and the little kids, or maybe you go into Sniper to kill a lot of these enemy Draco Knights or enemy Wyverns with like their 1-2 range in Lunatic. Sometimes you might need to go in Swordmaster to use the Worm Slayer and double with it. So there's still a lot of use cases for foot units. So it's not balanced, but again, if you're looking for a game where you'd use a bit of both, this is still like a game that has that. FE13, Fire Emblem Awakening. I'm putting this one in balanced. It's not the game that I'm most confident in giving advice for, but I think this one, more than almost any other entry, depends on what difficulty you're playing on. If you're on a low difficulty, like normal or hard, then movement is pretty dominant because you can just murder everything with the right pair up and skill setup if you're in Wyvern or if you're in Paladin. That's the main, for example, draft racing strategy. So if we're only looking at those difficulties, then I think it goes like this direction. On the other hand, I think movement matters less in a route heavy game like this one. Like I said, for Gaiden, if you can move forward a lot but you're actually not killing enemies, that's not very good. And I think combat is just more important in Awakening, and there are some cases where a mount actually hinders your combat. Some of the most infamous high difficulty builds from Awakening just involve foot unit classes. Sorcerer, mostly known for Nosferatu tanking, but there's a lot of experts in Awakening saying like actually Nosferatu tanking is not that good, but it does work. Sometimes it works really, really well. It's just a nice low brain foot unit in range with like an inventory full of Nosferatu. It does work. You got Hero with Soul tanking, same idea, but now it works on any weapons, so you can use better weapons in exchange for it being chance-based. And Grandmaster, which if you made a really good Robin, that's a fairly good class to be in because it's not really weak to anything. And you can use magic, but you might want to be a sorcerer for dark magic sometimes. But Grandmaster also rallies Spectrum, which is just an insane skill. Darkflyer and Falconite, also really good classes. Like Darkflyer has Guild Force, of course, which it's pretty controversial nowadays in the Awakening community as like, is this the really, really good skill that everyone says it was, or everyone used to say it was, or is it actually like bad? I've seen smart people argue both ways, and I'm not going to be in the centers and say they're both equally right, but I just don't know enough to comment on that in depth. But let's just say it's no longer as commonly accepted as a truth that Darkflyer is the best class ever and Guild Force is the best skill ever. I just wanted to have said that. Falconite, also really good. It has rally speed and it has staff support, which is really, really nice. Falconite Lissa, I think, is considered pretty good, but also Sage Lissa. So again, depends on who you ask, what you do, what your preferences are. There's a lot of people who have cleared Lunatic and Lunatic Plus, made like videos and guides on them. They're all really interesting, and they all say different things, which is what I think is really interesting about Awakening, and I think leans me towards putting it in balanced. I also feel that Flyer and Cavalier weaknesses in Awakening matter more than ever, because for one, effective might is tripled instead of like in, for example, FE7 where it's doubled. And if you're using a flyer, then just running them into a group of enemies that has like Excalibur or Silver Bows or forged versions of those can be really, really deadly. And unless you have like a lot of avoid skills, it can just kill you, even on normal or hard mode. Or you got like enemies with a forged beast killer that can also be really, really bad for you. So I think they have to be more careful than ever in this game to not die. And similarly on like Lunatic Plus, you can of course have issues with counter, but that goes for any class ever. But it does mean that you have to be just more deliberate about what you do. Sometimes that's good for mounted units because they have more flexibility in going back and forth. Guild Force is more effective when you can move 9 tiles than if you can move 6. But yeah, I think it's actually really interesting. It's really cool. I will say for Awakening, there is an argument for putting it in mounts better because units in this game have no feet, so they can't really be foot units. Birthright. Birthright, I'm going to put in foot better. I think this could be the only other game where you can make the case for foot units being better. A lot of it has to do with similar things as Awakening. So because it's Birthright, and the most broken unit builds are generally like ninjas and Ryoma, and to a lesser extent like the Oni chieftains. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. Those are just examples of builds that I know are really good, and they work because they have 1-2 range, and either they 1-round KO, which is Ryoma. Often that's what he does, or because they can survive long enough to sort of just do everything you need them to, like ninjas with soul in case of like Silas. Only savages, of course, or only chieftains, they live because they're using the core spirit and they have massive defense like Rinka, or maybe they have some other kind of sustain going on. Hoshido also just doesn't have that many mounted class. Like, a lot of units just cannot class into a mounted class without some help from Corrin, because the Cavalier and Wyvern trees are Norian, and those are like the best mounted classes to have. But if you do have a unit that can do it, like, again, Corrin or Silas, that tends to help them more than it hurts them. Like, they want to spend some time in those classes to get the really good skills from there, at least. But trying to use a mounted units to clear late game maps in Birthright always felt really, really bad for me. For similar reasons, as I said, like in Awakening, like the effective damage can be just so debilitating. Like trying to use a Wyvern in like the Iago map in late game Birthright, for example, felt pretty bad last time I tried it. Like, I don't have great 1-2 range, like hand axes suck in this game, and the Bow Knights just kind of hurt me so much. So I'd much rather be on foot, at least that way no one's effective against me, and I could just kind of murder everything. And if I have to go like 2 tiles slower every time, that kind of sucks. That's it. Let's see how the opposite Conquest fares. I'm going to put that one in Mount Better. And as I said before, this is where Wyvern and Cavalier are. They're Norian classes. They're really good, and they have really good skill sets. There is a lot of room for good foot unit builds, but a lot of them might involve like sneaking into a mounted class or inheriting a mounted unit's class skill. Shelter is a skill I haven't really mentioned yet, and it's really, really good. It enables a lot of strong strategies, most notably Shelter Dancing. You don't actually need a dancer to do Shelter to move some unit again, but it's like the easiest way to do it. Basically, you run up to a unit, use Shelter on them, and then if you take them and then switch, they can take another action. And often people do this by using this with Azura, like Azura moves, dance someone, and then you Shelter Azura, and then on a unit will take Azura and then dance for another unit after switching. But you can also just have that other unit just do another action instead of that being Azura. So Shelter Dancing is very, very flexible. But there's a lot of other good skills too, right? You got really OP mounted units in this game, like Camilla and Xander, but again, not trying to go off the exceptions only here, so I'm not going to put it in Dominant just for that. Like, I'm not going to put it in Mount OP over that. But, yeah, I think overall, you'd rather be mounted than non-mounted, but there's a lot of room for foot units classes. Also, Odin Dark is really, really good. Then we got Fire Emblem Fates Revelation. This game is not real, so I'm just going to put it in balance and move on. Well, okay, I'm not going to quite do that, but it is a mix of Birthright and Conquest, like especially in terms of class access. It is pretty route heavy, but you do have the strong Conquest classes to work with, so you're probably going to want a bit of both. I'm just going to put it in balance, then pretend it doesn't exist again. This is probably the only balanced thing about Revelation, probably. Instead, I'd rather just talk about Echoes. So Echoes actually has pretty good class balance in terms of like mounts versus non-mounted. On one hand, being mounted is nice for units like Clive and Matilda, who, as I said, probably better in this game than they are in Echoes, and part of that is because this game lets them do more stuff, and then they are mounted and they can do that faster, like they can move forward more. Warp is nerfed in this game, so having a move has a bit more value than if you can warp all over the place. Besides Clive and Matilda, the White Wings are pretty good in this game. They're probably better in Gaiden. Like, they're definitely better in Gaiden, but they're still good. But there's also the big buff to foot units that is called the Killer Bow and Hunter's Volley. So yeah, balanced. Don't forget to actually put it there. So Leon and Python are pretty good because they're archers, and then eventually they do become mounted units, but they're really, really good even before that. And there's actually a point in the game in Echoes where you don't want to be promoted archer. If you're like playing New Baba's map, you can't climb the mountain to her fort if you are in a mounted class. So you'd much rather be a sniper and snipe them from 5 range away than you would be from being a bow knight when not being able to reach them at all. Anyway, but the best units in this game are actually the villagers, and in my opinion, they're both mounted and non-mounted, and they're both really good in both. So their best early class is the Dreadfighter tree, so like Mercenary, Myrmidon, etc., which is not mounted. They're just good with the lightning sword and just generally using like forged swords, like a forged silver or forged steel or whatever works. They're just kind of powerful in that tree. It's just the best thing to be. You don't want to really have more than one because there's only one lightning sword, and then the lightning sword falls off and you just don't have enough swords to make them both good. And it's certainly better to just funnel your kills into one and have the other ones be in more supportive roles, like a mage or, well, pretty much just mage. Mage works best for them, but it can be archer, I guess, if you want to. But the best way for the Dread Fighter to scale into the late game and become even stronger is actually when the Dread Fighter hit level 10, I believe, from the top of my head, they can promote back into Villager, which seems like a really bad idea, but they actually don't lose any real stats from doing so. And then they can promote from Villager again and now become an Archer. And now you have a really high stat Archer that can just start murdering everything, even as an Archer, but they're gonna gain XP really fast. There's no internal level system or anything. So they're gonna get a lot of XP into Archer. They're going to become a sniper, and eventually they're going to become a bow knight with massive stats, and use the killer bow as a bow knight and just one-round everything. And even if they don't two-shot something, they can just crit with the killer bow, or they can hunter's volley, kill something before they even get to attack back, which is really helpful against magical enemies. You can do this trick with Saber too, for example. Saber can just go from Dread Fighter to Villager. And you don't need any pitchforks or anything. This is just an option you have as a Dread Fighter, just promote into Villager. And it doesn't even take like massive favoritism or grinding. It basically is just play the dungeons normally, like don't go out of your way to get extra combats, but do fight enemies that are just in your way, and sneaking around them is just too much trouble. And they're just gonna do this, and you can still use other units as well. They don't need all the experience. It's really strong. It's probably the best strategy in Echoes overall. And this speaks in favor of both mounted and non-mounted in my opinion, because they spend like half their lifetime being non-mounted, and the other half being mounted. There are still enemies that bow knights kind of struggle against, especially if it's like a mortal person, if it's like a Leon or a Python, which is fiends in general, so they take halved bow damage, and they are just really defensively powerful. That's where having, for example, a magical attacker is really important, so you can't just rely on a single class type to kill everything. That's why I think the class balance, even beyond just mount versus non-mount, is pretty good in Echoes. And the best team comp, I think, in Echoes actually has a bit of both. So yeah, that's why I think this should be in balanced. Even though this is the game that has like swamps and everything in it. 3 houses. I think this game has mounts being better. Not dominant, just better. So the game is free reclassing, so any unit can be just about any class they want to. But the Wyverns have massive stats. We knew this before the game even came out. We had like access to all the class bases, and yeah, Wyverns just have insane stats and super canto. And there's a weird dismount mechanic in most games so far. Either dismounting is not there, or when it is there, it helps actually balance the rift. Here, the dismount mechanics makes Wyverns just even better than they already are, because you can be a Wyvern at the start of your turn that just is mounted, fly somewhere, and then if there's bows around, you can just dismount if you want to, and now you have no bow weakness. And the next turn, you can go mount again before you move, and then move somewhere and just be on your mount for the next turn. Like, it's just so broken. It's so stupid. It's really, really good, and that's just one aspect of them that's really good. The weapon access is also good. You can reclass into them very easily because the class requirements for Wyvern are easy to reach, even in Maddening, where the experience you get in weapon ranks is pretty low from teaching. The Cavalier class, on the other hand, and the whole Paladin tree, kind of blows. It has its uses, like it's fine, and I enjoyed using like 1 or 2 in my playthroughs, but that's like the max, whereas Wyverns, I want more of those for sure if I had to choose. That said, it's not that good of an idea to have a bunch of Wyverns on your team. Like the first Wyvern you make is going to feel absolutely overpowered. They're going to be the first one you add to your army just adds the most value by far. It's like, oh my god, I'm just going to build my team around that unit. But you only have so many flying battalions, and Wyverns become exponentially better when you can support them with ground-based support battalions like Stride and Retribution. And there are some things you're missing out on if you're only using flyers for combat. For example, there's some really good battalions that flyers cannot equip. Like, flyers cannot equip ground-based battalions. I should probably have started with that. One of my favorites, for example, is the Dusker Heavy Boys, the battalion you get from playing Dimitri's or the Dew's Paralog. That gives like massive strength and defense, like 10 defense and 8 strength or something like that, or even more. Well, it's not strength, it's damage dealt or physical damage dealt, but it's so good, and a Wyvern can't use it. So you're missing out big time. And Wyverns, as good as they are, they can't just solo Maddening by themselves. So sometimes you just want a foot unit to clean up instead. Now, I'm not gonna call that balanced. Like, I still think most of the time the Wyvern is just better. And like Wyvern Riders being the best class by far, and then the upgrade to Wyvern Lord is also really good. But I do think sometimes people overstate the Wyvern supremacy in 3 houses. I do think there's a place for other units, which I think makes it a perfect fit for the mounts better tier over here. Now, semi-last but least is Fire Emblem Engage. I'm gonna put that one in balanced. So mounts are like better at moving around in Engage, but only a little bit. It's like 1 point of movement that they get. And they also still take the heavy terrain penalty. So the mobility advantage is lessened. And cavalry and flying are like class tags. They're like class properties, or whatever you want to call them. And those properties don't really do a whole lot by themselves, besides what we know they do, like moving around a little bit more in terrain, and flying is ignoring terrain. And a lot of the time, you'd rather be another class type, especially for like combat. You might want to be a dragon, like a Leer, or you might want to be a mystical unit because you want to ignore terrain bonuses on enemies. I really like killing enemies that are on defensive terrain with a mystical unit, for example, some of the time. So being mounted feels less like, oh, this is just better in this game, and more like a trade-off that you sometimes want and sometimes you don't want. There are still bonuses to being a cavalier. Like, for example, for the Sigurd emblem, it gives you extra movement when you are in a mounted class. So it's still good. And I still think that, for example, Mage Knight and Wolf Knight and Wyvern, all those classes are really, really good in this game. You should probably have 1 or 2 of each on your team if you're trying to make it the best it could possibly be. Or if you're having trouble, like, you should reclass those into those classes. Like, all those classes, like, Wolf Knight and Mage Knight have really good 1-to range, and Wyvern has really good mobility still and good stats. Mage Knight having Chaos Style, +3 speed when you're attacking. If you're attacking a physical enemy with a Mage Knight, basically, it's pretty good. Levin Sword is like a really good weapon. Wolf Knights get to take advantage of knives, which can be forged to be a lot stronger. So all these things still help certain mounted classes, but itself being mounted is not that great. And I think there's a lot of cases still where you want to be a non-cavalier or a non-flying unit. But they are really good. So if someone were to put them here in mounts better, I wouldn't be super offended, but I do think there's enough of a place for like Mage Knight, Wolf Knight, Wyvern classes, like the Dragon classes, or the super good Byleth boost, for example. So, I don't know. I think it's pretty close here. But let me know what you think. Finally, we have Fire Emblem Warriors, the game everyone knows and loves that I just had to tier here. They're going to go in mounted OP. And this is just because Camilla belly flopping all over the place is one of the easiest ways to get an S rank. So, at the end of the day, we have 2 games, not one, we have 2 games where mounts are far above and like beyond the rest, like inarguably much better. Really one. We have 9 games where mounts are better, but foot units can still compete. And then we have 7 games where they seem reasonably imbalanced, like it's so close that it's kind of hard to say for sure, but generally I'd say they're pretty well balanced in all these 7. And then we have 2 games where foot units are better, and these are rankings that I'm definitely like a little bit unsure of, and I could see them going imbalanced or even further if you wanted to. And we have no games where foot units are actually significantly better, which I mean kind of aligns with the conclusion we came to start, right? Which is that mounted units are like generally better than non-mounted units. We'll see if this changes in Fortune's Weave, if they're going to make any big updates to the system. I don't think we'll see it anywhere above this line of balanced, but we'll see. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment down below, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.